It's the end of suspensions as we know it, and I feel fine. So should you. Greetings and welcome to this episode on Geeks First. Today, we're going to have a quick talk about the scheduled banned and restricted announcement that was just published by LSS on December 18th, 2023. This is kind of an interesting new precedent because in this article, they've really shook things up, and I think it's a good discussion that I'd like to have with you. So sit back, relax, and take a listen while I chat about all things flesh and blood. So while this, on the surface, banned and restricted announcement looks fairly routine, I first have to go to the bottom to explain why this is truly a game changer. We actually have to start at the end before we start explaining why this is so important. The end of suspensions. Now, with this update, it says that they are officially discontinuing the use of suspended as the category. Well, as one may remember, I made a video earlier on this year where Drone of Brutality was suspended, or in some cases it was banned and then brought back. The suspended nomenclature was leveraged to fill a gap before the Living Legend check, which had recently changed from a once a quarter or once a set or I think once a big release to now weekly. That gap, which originally existed because a hero was obtaining too many points and had an overage, look at Starvo, and if you reference my old video, I had that Excel spreadsheet that had a bunch of heroes that had over 1,000 points. Now, with this weekly check, I could expect to see some heroes maybe getting just over that 1,000 threshold or 500 for Blitz, but you won't see another hero hitting 1,500 or 1,400 or 1,300 unless some really weird scenarios happen where it lines up with like a Worlds and they're at like 995 or 950 and they win and they blow past, right? So that weekly suspended check is why I believe the suspension is no longer going to be a thing. And they kind of call some of that out here, where it seemed as an important way to let players know the long-term intentions around targeting cards. And why this is important is because suspension was a mechanism to, I think, fix a stopgap in how the game itself was functioning, and that was discovered to have kind of, I don't want to say a flaw. Flaw is a bad word, but if we look at it and say that there were some issues around how a card entered and exited suspended, it affected, if you weren't on the pulse of things, it did affect a little bit of that. Now, I'll give some credit to those folks that are saying, well, that's too hard to keep up with. Well, it's not, because they didn't do it that often, but honestly, if you're in any kind of pro level circuit, you're going to be checking this stuff anyway, so it's not a big deal. Like kitchen table play, or maybe if you go to your army once a month or once every quarter, sure, you'll probably have some problems because your hero at this point might have been rotated out. But that's where the weekly Living Legend status, and also by being a good steward of your community, bringing a spare deck that is still legal for those folks to test out and play if then something else happens. You at least have something. So there's alternative workarounds for every argument of a pro or a con. I can give you a pro that will hopefully, aid you in your journey. But focusing back on the suspension, it says, if it is our intention to ban or unban cards only in certain heroes achieve Living Legend. So what they've basically said is they're going to try to only use suspensions in the Living Legend format, and they're going to let the other formats stand on their own. So CC, Blitz, those formats are not going to be affected as much by this. So we're going to now jump to the top here and talk about a couple other things, which to me don't affect me as much because I don't play as much CC. But I do want to talk about, from my perspective as a casual player, what I see in some of these things. So the next ban and restricted announcement says it's going to be on March 25th. So that's after heavy hitters, but before the next set. So that's going to be an in-between because they're only going to have 3 sets in the year of 2024 officially slated, as in that's what we've been told. Now there could be there's probably not going to be PvE, so sorry, as much as I'd love to see that, I don't think it's happening, that there could be a supplemental set like another TCC versus LSS, kind of round the table edition. There might be, I'm assuming it's going to be the year of onboarding. So if I had to take a guess, the revamp of the Classic Battles version is going to be brought into play. So with Classic Constructed, nothing changed. And what they're kind of calling out here is that, in the post-Icelander world, where where Lexi and Icelander have gone to Living Legend, they're saying that there is just a diversity of people that are out. That's what I'm seeing. I see that in tournaments, obviously 5-1 Worlds, so there's a lot going on there. In Blitz, a lot of the changes that are here look like they're going more toward a wizard aspect. So Aether Wildfire is going from banned to legal, and Stir the Aether Winds, which was banned, is now legal. And then what is kind of the curveball that a lot of people have been talking about, and I want to weigh in on this thought, is Centauri Sabers is going to be the signature weapon for Kasai, which Kasai just hit Living Legend in Blitz, the original Kasai. Now there's a new Kasai coming in Heavy Hitters. And that means that the signature weapon for the new Kasai is the same weapon that was originally a crew weapon for the original Kasai, which is Centauri Sabers. So that's kind of awesome in its own regard, because that does mean that over the course of the game, there will be ebbs and flows. There will be weapons or heroes or maybe talents that are coming in and out. Like right now, there really is no elemental talents in the world of CC. We do not really have access to ice, lightning, and earth because Oldhim is out, Starvo is out, and Lexi is now gone. You do have access to Draconic because there are two heroes that leverage that. But the whole Tales of Aria world may honestly be where things go after Heavy Hitters, theoretically. I do want to call it a really interesting phrase that I've seen here, where they're saying that right now the metagame feels like a blank slate, and we're excited to see where players will write the next chapter. I think what that to me means wholeheartedly is that, as kind of a tangent to Sloop's video recently that he had, which is something I've been thinking about, but I hadn't found a way to formally put it. So his video is excellent. You might want to go watch it, but it's the powering down of Flesh and Blood. And for a long time, I've been trying to find the words, and his video helped put some of that into perspective for me, because the original heroes in the first arc of Flesh and Blood, the WTR crew, arc, even up until when arc was technically before, whatever, I'm not, ignore that. The first arc, which, really goes all the way up to, I would say, Everfest, which is all of Flesh and Blood 1.0. Those heroes were in its own ecosystem good and had power against each other. But once you got to a certain point where those heroes became too either consistent or good for themselves, you kind of run into this scenario where that's why I think, especially at the Uprising Dynasty, and even as we shake down the list further in 2.0, it's not that the heroes have been powered down, it's that the expectation of the free action points, the free resources, the ability to kind of break the core fundamental balancing act between what a card can produce and what a hero is capable of outputting. And maybe break is a bad term, because I don't want to make it sound like the game is broke. It's not. But there was a clear line where they had to make the choice to continue to escalate or back that off and let the system do its thing. Let those living legends, which they have done, go out. And now that, it's kind of like a weird mathematical asymptote, right? If you look at it on a graph, you basically have these original heroes that are just skyrocketing because they're just doing so much better, and these new ones have no room to work. But as soon as they're gone, and you had to, let's say, zoom in on that chart, well, now that chart is macroed, even bigger, and the heroes that couldn't really compete because they were just so overshadowed, because again, why go to a competitive competition and try an experiment when you can go with the tried and true and know that you're going to place, right? So I think that's going to be where the shakeup's going to happen, and that's what this is so exciting to me. That blank slate means that you're going to start seeing some really weird, what we would used to probably call jank decks. Like, you're going to see Riptide builds, you're going to see Azuri builds, you're going to see other heroes that probably, I mean, in Blitz, like, Dash is fun, right? But you might have Data Doll. You're going to have just folks that are these heroes that you wouldn't have suspected to see much competitive play, and I think they're going to be much more viable because the ecosystem is now back on itself where they are viable within the bubble that they exist. And sooner or later, I feel like over time that bubble is going to grow and shrink, grow and shrink, grow and shrink, and that's kind of the essence, in my opinion, of Flesh and Blood. That's what I've been trying to convey, and I haven't found a way to do that. That's a very long-winded explanation, but that is the essence of the Living Legend system. Heroes will get very, strong, and with the list slot that they've put in here, or with this expansion slot, they can ad hoc every set, give slight tweaks or tunes, or give something to a class and push it in a little direction, or give it a little extra help or hint that it wasn't originally going to have, and that's awesome. That's pretty sweet. Circling back on the absence of Kano piece in here, so because Kano is also a living legend, that was something that happened a little bit ago. It's nice that, I guess, they're trying to put stuff back into the format so that other heroes can leverage those opportunities, especially with the Emperor being really the other go-to wizard at this point. But the Emperor has restrictions of only using red. The next interesting thing about this banned and restricted list, which is why it's worth doing a video on, is the next sentence here, where it's talking about the divergent outcomes, and with living legend heroes basically having their weapon come back, and then also being able to have new weapons in a future date be assigned to that. And you notice that actually with the new Prism. The Prism now has 2 signature weapons, right? They've revealed a new weapon, and they had another weapon. So those 2 weapons together are both the signature weapon for that hero. And it sounds amazing that they're looking at doing basically kind of multi-classing or subclassing heroes in having different build tech trees, so to speak. And each of those weapons may yield better for a specific type of build. Moving on to Living Legend, there's a lot of cards that are now restricted. Now, restricted is a new-ish way of evaluating how a card can be leveraged in the game of Flesh and Blood. Up to this point, the typical way you would use the word restricted would be the word legendary on a card, because it would mean that you can only have one of those in your deck at a time. So like in Blitz, if you could have 2, you would only be able to have 1. And in CC, if you could have 3, you'd only have 1. So by restricting a card, it basically puts the bolts on the legendary keyword to those cards. So Awakening Channel, Lake Frigid, Crippling Crush, Hypothermia, Oakenold, Starstruck, and Warmonger's Diplomacy. Now, in Living Legend, obviously that being the gloves are off, it's just go wild. I'm not well versed enough to understand why restricting those would affect too much other than Starvo, but they do spell out some of that in here, where because the world's Living Legend was basically a Starvo mirror, and even at the coaxing wall, I went there and saw that there were a lot of Starvos. Starvo was not the 100% meta that was there, so that was kind of nice to see that. This statement here I do want to read verbatim because it is important. With the goal in mind, we'll be beginning the management of the Living Legend format with a liberal use of the word restricted rather than typical bans that we see in Flesh and Blood. A registered deck contained up to 1 copy of a particular restricted card, and we'd like Living Legend format to be a place where we can continue to play all of your cards as a balanced metagame as circumstances of the format allow us to create. However, we recognize that some power outliers may ultimately make this impossible. If that's true, rest assured that we will use bans where necessary. That is a awesome piece of statement for a couple of main reasons. It means that if you have collected all of a set, so I'm going to have a video coming out soon about my set collection, because that's one of the things that I'm working on right now, talking about how I am doing set collecting. Not a lot of people, I believe, are doing that. Now, there's some people like Master Set Mattis that are doing that more publicly, but I don't know of a lot of people that are literally trying to collect either a Blitz playset or a full playset, because if you technically go into the playset world, a foil and a non-foil of the same card is 2. That's a Blitz playset. I won't go into more detail until I get in that video, but that's a sneak peek. So when you look at this fact where it's saying that a card over time, especially because Flesh and Blood is a non-rotating game, right? They're using Living Legend to control that rotation. It means that you're going to have certain cards that may have fallen out of favor and or were originally banned, but now you can come back to those cards and you can still collect them and have them, and don't get rid of them, because there's no sense in selling it if you whatever. Anyways, you can just have that, and then later, if it's restricted or put into Living Legend, you can just boop, pop it on, and there you go. So the last bit here is Commoner, and it's actually a format that, while I haven't chatted much about on the channel, I've been learning and trying to make good deck lists for, because I feel it's a great way to play a game. Now, there's been a lot of conversation around the nuances of Commoner, and I'll leave that for its own video, such as, folks wanting to include rares or things of that nature. But in this case, they banned 2 cards, and they gave the explanation as to why. Every game is going to have cards that function strictly better than other cards for one reason or another. In Flesh and Blood, because of the class and talent system, some cards, that are, in this case, Amulet of Ice is an ice card. Stubby Hammers was leveraged by, obviously, a couple heroes, but Fi comes to mind mostly. And I think that giving access to those cards based on my play style means that I'm going to have a lot more consistency and or feel bad moments, and I think that it's good that they have taken those out of rotation. I would rather have 1 or 2, especially if it's commons, banned than have a legendary ban. I think somewhere in the way back past they said something very similar to that. They said that they were going to try their best not to ban legendaries, because obviously the legendaries, they're good hits, right? And if that's your first hit and then all of a sudden you go look and it's banned, you're not going to feel really good about it. So I feel like they took inspiration from WTR and smashed it with the weapon expandability of Crew, because in Crew there was a lot of additional weapons and even young heroes, and they really, competitively, word I just made up, say that right here, where it says it brings the biggest, strongest, hardest hitting fun to Flesh and Blood gambling tables, yet featuring 6 heroes across Brute, Guardian, and Warrior classes, crossover hybrid cards, more weapons and equipment than any draftable set before, and a number of options for how you build and fight in the arena are huge. So, because this is a UPF focused-ish side, I don't know, maybe not the main version, but it is definitely UPF focused in some regard. I could imagine that the number of weapons, especially for these heroes, there might be a Brute/Guardian weapon or a Guardian/Warrior, and I talked a little bit about that in one of the other, like I said, the same video I did the equipment chart on. So we'll see if any of that comes to fruition. But either way, there's going to be gambling. There's a new keyword called Universal that just got talked about, and Universal, I think, breaks the mold in a lot of ways, because it theoretically can open up a wide array of things, especially if there's a way to bolt that on to other cards. And Universal is on a generic in that case. We'll talk about that in another video, but I did just want to point out this one little bolt-on thing on top of the BNR announcement, or now it's just, I guess, so it used to be the BNS, Ban and Suspended, now it's the BNR, Ban and Restricted maybe, or just the update, which will come every week with the Living Legend update. So I'm going to finally get on top of that bandwagon. It's the holidays. This will be the video that comes out right before Christmas, whatever holiday that you celebrate. Happy holidays, and hopefully you and your family and friends are doing well. I will definitely be reevaluating how I am focusing on certain aspects of my channel, and will be building more content as I go, and possibly start looking at doing some less highly edited and more topic focused conversation pieces that may have a demonstration or a whiteboard, because it seems like that was a direction somebody had suggested. So next time, may your games be fun and your friendships grow. Cheers. Your captain.